Today, we learned that President-elect Trump is now receiving intelligence briefings once again. Now, we don't know the specifics of those briefings, but it's highly likely that they involve classified material. Remember the last time Donald Trump had regular access to classified information? Remember that? Well, he revealed the capability of U.S. spy satellites by publicly tweeting out a photo of an Iranian missile launch site. He shared classified intelligence gathered by a foreign ally with Russian officials in the Oval Office. And, of course, he was indicted on 40 federal criminal counts related to the mishandling of classified documents after he left office. Remember all that? We also learned that Trump's team is continuing to opt out of the official transition process in ways that jeopardize national security. The Washington Post reports that in calls with foreign heads of state, Trump has cut out the State Department, its secure lines, and its official interpreters. As his team considers hundreds of potential appointees for key jobs, Trump has also so far declined to let the FBI check for potential red flags and security threats to guard against espionage, instead relying on private campaign lawyers for some appointees and doing no vetting at all for others. Joining me now is Congressman Jason Crow, Democrat of Colorado, who serves on the House Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committees. Congressman Crow, thank you for being here. We just rattled off a litany of distressing reporting about this Trump transition, and I wonder, as someone who sits on the committees that you do, what alarms you the most about what we're hearing?
Well, Alex, it's kind of hard to really decide where to start here, right? There's the issues of process. You kind of outlined some processes and procedures, security checks and protocol, and these aren't put in place just for fun, right? Those are put in place to protect against spies, to protect against espionage, to protect the transfer and the dissemination of really critical information that, isn't going to just be left somewhere. But we have to understand that there are adversaries actively trying to get this stuff, trying to penetrate our cybersecurity systems every day. So protecting this and having these processes in place is meant to protect the American people, and it's meant to protect our intelligence officers and our servicemen and women who are serving in dangerous places, which that information could put them in a compromising position. So, yes, certainly the process is flawed, but as we all well know, the fundamentals of these nominees in their very policies themselves are disturbing as well.
Can I just follow on that? I mean, would you assume that foreign adversaries are already trying to listen in on these phone calls that Trump is having with world leaders, given that he's not using secure lines, he's not engaging in any of the security protocols that normally exist?
Well, I don't have to assume that. I know that to be true, right? Like, listen, as we sit here right now having this conversation, we have thousands of intelligence officers around the globe in very dangerous situations, putting themselves at risk to collect information or to protect information, to prevent attacks against the American people, to prevent our financial systems from being breached. We have servicemen and women around the globe in dangerous places, protecting American citizens, protecting our assets. Right? This is an hourly occurrence, right? This is an active, dynamic situation. So sitting back even a day or two, letting our guard down, poses substantial risk. And when you look at the people that he has nominated, people like Tulsi Gabbard and others who not only are incompetent and don't have the experience to do this, but I actually question their very loyalties in some cases. Tulsi Gabbard, for example, has a very long history of showing affinity for dictators and autocrats, of being irresponsible with Russian propaganda. And when I say irresponsible, that's actually putting it generously for actually somebody who has purposely perpetuated that propaganda. It's a very dangerous time here.
Well, I mean, and I was going to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard, who would lead, I believe it's 18 intelligence agencies. What about Pete Hegseth, who is Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense? I mean, there are questions about his support for soldiers accused of war crimes. There are his own sexual assault. There's an NDA that he signed in the wake of some claims by a woman. That is an ongoing situation on the Hill. What concerns you about his nomination?
The lack of experience and simply that he was nominated because he will be loyal to Donald Trump. Listen, in your prior segment, when you were talking to Dan and Claire, you actually made a really interesting point about Democrats being put in a position of defending agencies and departments. That's actually not what we're doing. We're not defending agencies and departments. What we're trying to do is ensure that government works to protect Americans, that it works to serve Americans. And that can take the form of making sure that fraud, waste, and abuse or government inefficiency is addressed in Capitol Hill. But in these instances, it takes the form of making sure that nominees are not put into positions to dismantle important agencies and functions, to line the pockets of cronies or supporters of Donald Trump, or even worse, to weaponize those agencies against Donald Trump's opponents, which very clearly is the case with Matt Gaetz, for example. So it is the same thing we're doing. We are working to ensure that government works for Americans, not for individuals, not for donors.
Can I follow up on that, though? Because I think that there's probably a finer line than there should be separating the idea of Democrats who want to ensure the integrity of institutions and the notion of just being a blanket defender of bureaucracy. And I say that because the Overton window has shifted so much that unless you're there to burn it all down, you're somehow part of the deep state. And I wonder if you think that job of Democrats defending the institutions of democracy and the guardrails that protect our representative democracy is going to be a lot harder in Trump 2.0 when you maybe have people like Matt Gaetz at the Department of Justice and Tulsi Gabbard at the Office of National Intelligence. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about? Yeah, people talk a lot about defending institutions, defending the guardrails, but defending the institution and the guardrails is not the end, right? That is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to protect Americans and ensure that government serves them, right? That's the goal. These guardrails, these institutions are in furtherance of that goal. Right. So whenever we talk about, defending the rules-based international order, defending guardrails, defending institutions, there's a lot of people who are like, well, why? In furtherance of what end? So it's really important that when we talk about this, we're talking about what it is we're trying to achieve and how it serves Americans and the people in my district in Colorado, the families, how their lives are impacted by, clean food, clean water, aviation inspectors, rail line inspectors, intelligence officers that are thwarting attacks against Americans. That is the goal, and that's the way we need to talk about it, and that's the way that we need to pursue policy and oversight. Greater specificity. Congressman Jason Crow, thank you so much for your perspective on this. It's really great to hear from a sitting member of Congress about the road ahead. I appreciate your time tonight, sir.
Thank you.